Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of Inside the Criminal Mind, where I review specific episodes of the show, break down criminal behavior, and explain how this behavior can potentially be prevented. That's usually the standard format that I've been using for the past, or since I've started this. However, this episode is going to have a bit of a new perspective added onto it. I can't guarantee that it'll happen with every episode that I do from here on out. However, I just wanted to give you guys a little forewarning that it's not like bad, but just so y'all can be prepared. Because it's not necessarily just like the criminal mind, but we're also going to be thinking and discussing about a couple of other things as well. So, like always, we'll follow this format along the presentation. I'll introduce myself and my journey first, then a synopsis of the episode, probably relevant theories, criminal prevention, and finally a conclusion and Q&A if needed. First of all, I'm Sharissa, or Eradication Writer on Instagram, or Eradication Lady on Twitter. I've had my own mental health journey, which I finally came to a full understanding around 3 years ago, and it's completely normal. I'm 28 now. 3 years ago, I turned 25. There was a lot of self-discovery when I turned 25, and it just all culminated because I was doing a lot of internal work from like 24, age 24, there was a lot of internal work going on. Like I was doing a lot of self-discovery and really just trying to find exactly who I was, what I liked, what my passions were. So it was very instrumental for me whenever I hit 25 for everything to finally just connect and make sense. So I was raised not to take care of my mental health because it wasn't important per se. But I've used my journey to re-inspire my passion of psychology, and now I'm earning my master's in psychology this summer and hoping to jump into the doctoral program immediately following my graduation. Because of my own journey, it motivated me to work towards destigmatizing important conversations surrounding psychological principles, mental health, human rights, and how they can all work together. So this series is basically a great tool to expand our perspectives regarding our societal issues while providing examples of multiple different cases and also how they relate to certain real life cases and how we can use this information to basically make our society better. So the synopsis. The synopsis was basically another continuation of the previous episode, just like last week. At the end of the previous episode, Agent Morgan's pregnant wife was shot outside of a hospital. He's removed from the case as he shows his emotionality when he's involved. As the team tries to figure out who did this, Derek Morgan is having re-experiencing symptoms of the event and realizes more details that point to who the unsub is. Morgan leaves as he falls into the unsub's trap and is held hostage and nearly killed. At the end of the episode, Morgan decides it's best for him to leave the BAU and for the safety of his new little family. So, quick little side note, whenever I remember watching this episode live when it came on TV. I'm pretty sure. I'm not gonna bet, but I'm pretty sure. And I remember it was pretty crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, like I could not believe that Agent Morgan was leaving. But it made sense. It made sense. So yeah. This was a really interesting episode, basically because, you really get to see how traumatic events can really affect somebody. I know that there was another episode I'm going to lightly reference. I don't remember which episode it was, but it was the episode where Spencer was actually, tortured. And it was, I know that affected him in a deep way because, they got him hooked on heroin or something. And so that was, that's another really great example of how, experiencing trauma can affect the way that you work. It can affect the way that you have your relationships. It affects you interpersonally, intrapersonally, in so many different ways. So I'm excited to get into this. So, probable relevant theories. So, I want to first go ahead and just touch base on who the actual unsub is, who ended up being arrested in the very end. Chaz Montolo. He's described as by Agent Morgan as a narcissistic, homicidal psychopath, angry about his son's death, wants revenge, willing to kill Agent Morgan's wife and child. I don't know why I was reading off this slide. It's a bad habit. First, let's discuss Chaz Montolo, the unsub. When Morgan was held hostage, he called him a narcissistic, homicidal psychopath. Chaz wanted either Morgan, his wife, or his unborn child dead to make up for the life of his son, which he claims Morgan killed or took. He comes from a crime enterprise family and even faked his own death to come to America and stalk Agent Morgan before attempting to take matters into his own hands. Moving on to Agent Derek Morgan, he has some expressions within this episode himself. They were very normal for someone who is in his position. At this point, we have either experienced our own sort of trauma, or we know someone who has experienced some sort of trauma. I haven't met someone who hasn't either experienced or been very close to someone who has experienced trauma. And so these reactions that we see out of him are very normal reactions. Obviously, some people don't automatically turn to anger, right, especially right after an incident. Some people just shut down. Some people basically go into like a mental shock state. And I think that's kind of worthy of a discussion whenever we're talking about how people react in emotional states. I think that this was a really interesting episode to point that out, considering how, because if I remember correctly, in Spencer's situation, whenever that episode happened, I don't even know if it's even happened at this point yet, but he became more withdrawn. And, some aspects of his personality even were affected by the rehabilitative period, basically. Of going through the trauma and having to rehabilitate from that trauma. So, seeing Agent Morgan's reaction is a reminder that not everybody reacts in the same way. So, his pregnant wife was shot in front of him, which is traumatic, which is a traumatic experience. He went through the motions of anger, and he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that his wife and unborn child could be in danger. He was so upset that he needed to be taken off the case, especially just as he was just tortured just 6 months prior to this. 6 months prior to this, he was also held hostage by Chaz Montolo, or not necessarily, I don't think it was Chaz Montolo, I didn't watch that episode, but he was held hostage and tortured by his son, I believe, which is how this whole thing culminated into this episode. So, of course, he reacted with anger and eventually took matters into his own hands as well. He wasn't about to let the life of his wife and son be in danger. So, moving on to the theories and relevant ideas behind this, we'll start with Chaz. Was Chaz a textbook narcissistic homicidal psychopath? Possibly. From what we discussed last week of the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, it's quite possible. However, we don't really see enough of him in this episode to actually make that judgment. I don't know if we learn more about him in previous or future episodes. I did some research on the fandom for Criminal Minds on this episode. Not really much showed up that I didn't already get from this episode. So it's quite possible that he does meet that diagnostic criteria. However, I'm also not a licensed psychologist, so I can't actually say if he is or not anyways, but that's beside the point. It does look like it. If we base his psychopathy score on the PCLR, it's definite. It's more than likely. I had the list somewhere and I just don't feel like digging it out. But yeah, it seems like it. He came from a crime enterprise family, so it's very likely that all of those behaviors on that list check off. Obviously he was definitely homicidal. He was a hitman. He killed people for a living, so that's kind of the definition. So yeah, he was a narcissistic homicidal psychopath. However, I don't really know if that's like an actual phrase that they would use in that matter. But yeah, we get the point. Now, the interesting thing that I wanted to talk about here is with Derek Morgan. I say that there's a possibility of complex post-traumatic stress disorder because there are some diagnostic criteria that he doesn't necessarily have. Like I used the DSM-5 and I looked into it, it's 1111. I looked into the diagnostic criteria. There are a few of the qualifying categories that he doesn't necessarily meet. However, this episode only showed days after the event, and PTSD symptoms can happen anytime within 6 months of a traumatic experience. And I believe also in some cases it can take up to a year sometimes before like PTSD symptoms will emerge. And at that point, it's like delayed, but there is a diagnostic criteria for that. So Derek did end up stepping away from the BAU at the end of this episode to focus on his family and take the targets off his back. It makes sense. It does make sense. It's sad to see such a good character go, but, you know, it makes sense. I like when things make sense, you know, for the most part. And yeah, I mean, like, you know, some people probably wouldn't have found it that easy to step away from such a deeply involved career path. But, you know, whenever you almost lose your wife and unborn son and now born son, it becomes scary. It becomes like an epiphany, like a oh, this is we're going to take this in a different direction now. So it makes sense, right? Anyways. So I thought that having the discussion about CPTSD or even just PTSD in general is very important to have, just because, again, people react to certain things in different ways. That's why there's certain diagnostic criteria that comes behind being diagnosed with PTSD. Specifically also because, you know, you know, people experience things in different ways. You know, there's basically four or five specific groups of symptoms, or like categories of symptoms, and you basically have to meet one out of each of those categories in order to be diagnosed with PTSD. So it's, you know, it's one of those things we can't really say like, oh yeah, he has PTSD. It's possible that he might have had PTSD from the event that happened 6 months before. And that most definitely probably was triggered by this event that happens in this episode, or in the end of the last episode. However, it's just, especially whenever you're in the behavioral analysis unit, you know, it's kind of understood that you have secondary education in, or professional education in psychology of some sort. So yeah, like, it's possible that he also, you know, is able to recognize these signs and symptoms and kind of keep them in check. Also, there's just so many different things that I'm sure that he had gone through. They did say that he did pass his return eval whenever he returned to work after the whole torture incident. So, you know, if he didn't pass his eval, then, you know, he wouldn't have been back at work. But yeah, again, a great topic of discussion. If you want me to elaborate further, that might be an idea that I can do in another series. So Chaz having all these behaviors can be explained as he came from a large crime enterprise deep within his family. He was likely raised for the gang life, explaining how he became a hitman. The only way any of that could have been prevented is if there were better screens for mafia-like behaviors in countries outside of the USA, but also even within the USA. I say outside of the USA just because we normally see like mafia type of things in Europe, or like Russia and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. But sorry, my train of thought. it the only way it could have been really prevented is if these types of behaviors were seen and something was done about it, especially as he was a child. That's something that just like I believe. However, I believe that it's easier to change habits before they become an adult, before there's so many years of practicing habits a certain way. I do also believe, though, that if a person has a change of heart and they really want to change something about their life, no matter how old they are, it can always happen. There's always that possibility. It literally all is just a personal choice. So, yeah. Now, I just wanted to also talk about Derek Morgan's case here. That's why I slightly changed the title of this slide to criminal/victim prevention, because there's a few things that we can do to help prevent PTSD. And while these things are not, for sure going to prevent this from happening, these are really important characteristics and tips that we can integrate into people's lives, especially our loved ones, after a traumatic event. So with Agent Morgan, he could be considered a victim of trauma. Not only did he experience his wife getting hurt, but he was also a direct victim of this crime enterprise just a half a year earlier. Since we covered the possibility of PTSD, it makes sense to cover how we can also prevent PTSD. Now, this is not a sure set way to prevent PTSD from developing, but it helps to have these practices in place. He's a victim of trauma. But also, here's what we can do to take that victim mindset away from it. Continuous contact with support. If you are a loved one of somebody who has experienced trauma, continue to have contact with them. Don't be completely overbearing, because sometimes they probably won't even have the emotions or the words to express or to explain how they feel or what's going on in their mind. Just let them know that you're there for them when they're ready. And make sure that they always know that. If you are somebody who has experienced trauma and you're not sure what to do or how to get a hold of this, reach out to your loved ones. Reach out to those that you can trust. If you cannot, I urge you to call the mental health hotline, 988. Make sure loved ones are aware. So yes, that basically was going on with what I just said. If you are someone who is experiencing trauma or has experienced trauma and you're having some difficulty with it, make sure that the people who love you know that you're struggling and that you've experienced something traumatic. If you experience something traumatic and you haven't told anybody yet and it's bothering you, tell somebody. Tell somebody that you trust. And know what you want, not know what you want, but, know who you can and who is your support system is what I'm trying to say. Turn the victim mindset into a survivor one. And this is a hard one. Obviously, this is one that you can't just make it happen overnight. Some people can, and that's okay. And if you can't, that's also okay. I can speak from experience on this level that once I started shifting my powerlessness into a mindset that was, I can control this, the rest of my mental health improvement, my mental health journey and everything became so much easier, and it made so much more sense, and things just happened the way that they were meant to happen. I was able to gather control of my life in a way that I never thought would be possible, because I thought that my life was over at one point. So, sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it just takes support. Sometimes it just takes you finding yourself to realize it. If you want to have a conversation about that in particular, I can help you. However, again, I'm only qualified to have coaching conversations, but I am putting together a coaching program specifically to help people change their mindset. Create positive emotions. So creating positive emotions can be literally anything. laughing, like go to a comedy club. I went to a comedy club once whenever I was at a very low point in my life, and I'm sure it probably saved my life because I came out of that place feeling some type of way, and it was a good some type of way. So, if it just go to a comedy club, go dancing, take a run, like listen to some music that really makes you want to move. Get a pet that you really, really love, like my meow meow. She's amazing. She's looking out the window, but she's amazing. Find positive meaning in the experience. And whenever I started gathering the strength before I started having all of my epiphanies, I started doing things that were exciting, things that were full of experiences. Whenever I got out of a super toxic relationship in 2018, I made it basically one of my personal goals, one of my personal missions to just live life as full as possible, no matter what that meant. And it was the best idea that I could have done for myself because it led me to take trips alone, like solo trips, to things like anime conventions. Like I went to my first anime convention in the beginning of 2019, changed my life. It was one of the most empowering experiences to be like, I just took a trip on my own. I just did something on my own. Like it's seriously one of the best things that I could ever recommend is to travel alone, especially if you're going through like a healing period. Start a support group. Sometimes whenever you experience traumatic things, you yourself find it could be easier to start your own support group and find other people who are also have gone through similar situations or similar struggles, or even if they're not similar, just hearing other people's struggles, not really hearing their struggles, but being able to create a safe environment to allow everybody to be vulnerable and hear each other out can be very healing in a way. And starting your own support group is basically like doing a volunteer type of work. If you don't want to start a support group, then just go volunteer. Do something nice for somebody else. It can help you take your mind off of the trauma. And then finally, self-belief. Knowing in your own self that it's not your fault, whatever happened. Believing that you're going to be okay. Believing that you are a survivor and not a victim. You survived something terrible. But once you start actually truly believing that for yourself, that's when the real changes start happening. But the changes have to come from yourself. You have to feel it yourself. And finally, dangerous jobs equals dangerous risks to loved ones. It's just like one of those little messages. Obviously, if you're going to be a spy, if you're going to be in the FBI or something, that's kind of puts a target on your back sometimes. And if you don't have those boundaries with between your personal life and your work life, it's very possible that the targets can transfer from your back to your family's back and put your family in danger. Now, obviously, and that also goes for jobs like police officers and things like that. So yeah, it's just kind of goes without saying, dangerous jobs can also make dangerous risks for everybody. Don't rush healing from a traumatic experience. It takes time. Healing takes time. And I know that it gets super old to hear that. But literally, like grief, it takes time. Like you basically experience grief whenever you go through trauma in a way, because it's almost like a part of you dies with whatever happened. And so you can't rush that. It's one of those things that you should treat yourself with the most grace and care and comfort and love, because there's just a lot of transformation that can happen after a traumatic event. And I think that that's one of the most important lessons that I learned for myself. So yeah, I guess where I'm at here, if, obviously this isn't live and I'm about to explain why. If there's any questions, comments, and suggestions, please drop them into the comments of the video. I'll be more than happy to reply to those, literally. Sorry. Okay. Now, for those of you who are wondering why I'm not actually going live this week, that's basically because, well, I am getting dental work done tomorrow, and I'm not sure if I want to pull a Markiplier and try to record or live stream with half of my mouth being completely numb. So, yeah. So, yeah, I would really just appreciate any likes and comments and questions or suggestions or anything. Just drop those into the comments. And I will be back live next Thursday. And I just cannot wait to be back live to see comments as I'm reporting. But yeah. All right, everybody. I hope everybody has an amazing week. And I'll see you all next Thursday. Bye.